Hi everyone, my name is Rochelle Paquette. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a student at Osgoode Hall Law School, and I also work with the Osgoode Mediation Clinic. I come here today to talk to you about conflict resolution and mediation. But before we dive into the training session, I would like to give you a bit of background on the Osgoode Mediation Clinic by showing you a short video.
The Osgoode Mediation Clinic is located at Osgoode Hall Law School at York University.
The Osgoode Mediation Clinic provides free mediation services, conflict coaching seminars, and other resolution services to York University students, employees, and community members.
The clinic is trained to assist with a wide variety of conflicts, such as disputes between neighbors, employees, roommates, professors, peers, and more. The mediation process is 100% free and confidential. It uses third-party mediators to help guide parties through their conflict and help them reach a resolution. Mediators help parties understand each other's perspectives and work together to think of creative and sustainable ways to resolve their dispute. The clinic is staffed by Osgoode Law students who are trained and supervised by industry professionals. The Mediation Clinic also provides interactive workshops and seminars to help equip you with the tools that you need to resolve disputes. Let us help you resolve your dispute. Contact us today to see how we can help.
Now that you know a little bit about the Osgoode Mediation Clinic, let's begin today's training. Upon completing this session, you will be able to define and identify conflict, understand the importance of conflict resolution in your role as a peer leader. You will have acquired conflict resolution skills, and you will have learned a mediation process or framework that can be used to resolve conflicts. The first learning objective is to define conflict. I want you to take a moment and think of a few conflicts that you have either experienced personally or have seen unfolding around you. Perhaps you have noticed that conflicts materialize in many different forms. You may have recalled an internal conflict that you've had with yourself. You could have recalled a conflict with another individual, or you may have even considered a conflict with society as a whole. All this is to say that conflicts can and do arise anytime, anywhere, between anyone, and in your role as a peer leader is no exception. This leads us to our second objective of understanding the importance of conflict resolution, specifically in your role as a peer leader. Just as you did a moment ago, take another moment and try to think of potential conflicts you may encounter in your role as a peer leader specifically. A couple examples that came to mind for me were a difference of opinion during a Zoom session, or a teammate not delivering or not performing the way that they used to. Given that you may encounter such conflicts in your role as a peer leader, it is important to acquire conflict resolution skills so that you are prepared to handle situations as they arise. There are many conflict resolution skills one can acquire, and it is helpful to think of each one as a resource or tool at your disposal. Today we will focus on one of the most critical, being active listening. Active listening is loosely defined as the ability to focus completely on a speaker, understand their message, comprehend the information, and respond thoughtfully. Great. So how do we do that? With active listening skills. Active listening skills is a broad term that can be broken down into 6 steps, being encourage, clarify, reframe, reflect, summarize, and validate. Acquiring these active listening skills is critical for effective communication and ultimately conflict resolution. Let us go through each of the 6 steps together. The first step is encourage. Here you want to draw the other person out and get them talking. What is encouraging? It is using verbal and nonverbal cues to show that you are really listening. You can use short verbal affirmations such as, I see, I understand, or I am sorry you're dealing with this. You can also nod to show that you understand, smile to encourage the other person to continue, but try to avoid using distracting movements. All of these verbal and nonverbal cues convey attentiveness. Just be aware that appropriate vocalizations and body language vary from culture to culture. For example, maintaining eye contact could be a sign of respect in one culture, but a sign of disrespect in another. After you have finished encouraging the other person to share their thoughts and feelings with you, you need to clarify that you understand the situation fully. In order to clarify, you ask questions to confirm what the person said. Questions like, can you tell me which of those things happened first? Or, I'm not sure I understand why that upset you. Could you explain again? Taking the time to clarify helps you understand and helps the other person examine their own perceptions. Following clarifying, the next step is to reframe what the other person has said. Reframing is simply restating what the other person has said in your own words, using neutral or positive language. Reframing helps redefine the nature of the problem. If a situation is described as a win-lose, try to reframe it as a win-win. It can be helpful when there is a big difference in what the parties view between what is going on or what the key issues are. It also helps check facts and meaning. The statement on the slide says, so she said she would call back and then she called 2 days later. This example suggests the two parties have a different meaning for how long a callback should take. After reframing, it is time to reflect on what you think of the situation. Reflecting involves telling the other person what you think they are experiencing in your own words. For example, you said what she did hurt you a lot. It sounds like you felt really humiliated. Do I have that right? This can lead to the person being more expressive. It also provides a way to check the accuracy of your perceptions. The next step is to summarize. Summarizing is reiterating the main problems, themes, and feelings. It provides a review and is the basis from which to continue the dialogue. The last step is to validate. Active listening is a lot of work for all parties involved in the dialogue. It is important to show appreciation for the other person's efforts and acknowledge the value of talking. Affirm your positive feelings about being part of the dialogue. Now that we have covered active listening skills, we are going to go through the mediation process, which will put these skills into practice in an organized framework. You begin the mediation process with an opening statement, which sets the stage for the parties. The goal is to demystify what mediation is. opening statement should include the following. Welcome and calm the parties. Explain the mediator's role as a neutral third party and not a judge. Establish ground rules that ensure mutual respect, such as no interrupting. And explain that everything said in mediation is 100% confidential. It should also include that it is a voluntary process and active listening skills are necessary for mediation to be successful. Briefly explain the mediation process as follows. First, the parties get to speak directly to the mediator one-on-one about their concerns. Then the parties will speak directly to each other. Following that, everyone works towards an agreement that will resolve their concerns. After the opening statement, we move on to story development, allowing the parties to share their stories. The goal is to make sure parties feel their concerns are understood by the mediator. Story development stage should include the following. Giving each party a chance to tell the mediator how they see the situation and express their concerns. Mediators should use active listening to help each party say what they need to say. As peer leader, you would take on the role as mediator, and it is your job to make sure each party feels heard. It is important to maintain a perception of impartiality between the parties. Once the parties have each had an opportunity to share their respective story, we move on to identifying the interests of each party. The goal here is to shift the focus from positions to underlying interests. This diagram highlights the difference between positions and underlying interests, as well as the importance of identifying them. On the surface, or above the line in this diagram, there are two people that want just one orange. This represents a conflict, as it would seem that only one person can have the orange, which would result in a win-lose outcome. However, if we dig below the surface and identify their underlying interests for wanting the orange, we see that it is possible to turn this conflict into a win-win situation. Both people want to feel respected, which is a common and non-competing interest, so there is no conflict here. Person A wants the seeds from the orange, and person B wants the juice. These interests are different, but also non-competing, and again, there is no conflict here. Both people want the orange rind, which is a competing interest and potential conflict. However, there is enough orange rind to divide between both people for their respective purposes. By identifying the underlying interests, both people are able to get what they want and the conflict is resolved. In order to identify underlying interests, parties need to speak to each other about their concerns, what is important to them, and how they see the situation. As a peer leader or mediator, it is your job to ensure that each party feels understood by the other. Acknowledge points of understanding and make sure all concerns are covered. Once all the concerns have been uncovered, check if the parties are ready to work on a resolution. If the parties are ready to work on a resolution, it is time to start generating options so that everyone can move forward. The goal is to come to an agreement that resolves the conflict for each party. When generating options, you want to think about the underlying interests of each party. Encourage the parties to think of many possible alternatives for resolution. Evaluate each option and help with reality checking. Help the parties discuss specific points of agreement, and finally, make a complete agreement. You want to aim for a SMART agreement. It should be specific. Use detailed information in plain language. It should be measurable. Parties have to be able to know if the agreement is complied with. It should be accountable. Lay out who will do what. It should be realistic. Help parties evaluate how practical the agreement is. It should be timely. Set out timelines that are easy to follow. While mediation attempts to resolve conflict in a cooperative manner, sometimes things go wrong in tense and emotional situations. If the parties seem to be getting off track, there are a few things you can do to salvage the mediation process. First, remember that you are here because the parties want to resolve the conflict. You can caucus, which is essentially taking a break from the joint session with both parties. This gives the parties private time on their own or with the mediator one-on-one. Remind the parties of the ground rules they established at the outset. Search for shared interests and suggest options when necessary. And finally, help the parties see what they may not be seeing. I have included this anger level thermometer as a helpful aid. The left side lists behaviors that can escalate anger, and the right side suggests corresponding strategies for dealing with the escalating behavior. For example, if a party keeps interrupting, ask that party to wait their turn to talk and remind them of the ground rules. That brings us to the end of this training session on conflict resolution and mediation. Returning to our learning objectives, I wanted to briefly summarize what you learned today. We learned that conflicts could arise anytime, anywhere, between anyone, and that it is quite possible you may run into a conflict in your role as a peer leader. We learned what active listening skills are and the critical role they play in effective communication and ultimately conflict resolution. Finally, we learned a mediation process that can be used to resolve conflict, requiring active listening skills in order to be successful. Thank you for listening, everyone. Take care.